You're listening to Conversations with Chanda, a podcast that unpacks the community's grittiest, most vexing problems, hosted by Chanda Smith Baker.
This episode of Conversation with Chanda was supported by the Black Collective Foundation.
The conversation today is with an organization, a movement, if you will, a national organization that has been pushing the boundaries on what change looks like on a national level, but doing it with a localized strategy. And so we're going to have that conversation today with Simone and Ali Knight, who is the incoming CEO. He's been here a couple months, but he's still newish. And so we welcome you to the Twin Cities. And I had the opportunity to meet with the GreenLight folks before I got launched and before you were hired. And so it's always interesting to watch the trajectory of an organization. And so Simone, just by way of introduction, maybe the two of you, if you can just ground us a bit on GreenLight, and then I want to talk about your journey to the roles you guys are in. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Sounds perfect. Yep.
So can we talk about GreenLight? I'm sure everyone is familiar, but we'd like to hear it from your mouth.
Excellent. Well, really glad to be here. Thank you all for coming in, and thank you, Chanda, for creating a space for this conversation. And Simone, for your leadership, as you know. I've been here about 4 months, familiar with GreenLight because one of GreenLight's cities is the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where I'm based. And so I've had a chance to see the sort of transformative power of the GreenLight model locally in my community. And one of the things that attracted me to the role, but I think more broadly, the thing that I think that makes GreenLight special and magical is that it really is locally driven to drive and inform a national strategy for impact on urban poverty and, quite frankly, innovation in the philanthropic sector. And the way that we do that is that we identify a community where I would say it's fertile for a GreenLight type model, a place where there's assets, there are needs that are being unmet, and that there's local leadership and local capacity to implement the model. And what the model looks like, and Simone will talk a little bit more about that, is literally, identifying a local leader to pull together a community of leaders to identify the most pressing unmet problems and needs, and then using the GreenLight network to identify models that work elsewhere that could be translated locally. But the beauty of it is to work to make sure that it works locally, is to adapt it, to make sure that something that works elsewhere is taking consideration for the local context, understanding what exists in the local ecosystem, and adapting the model to make sure that it fits and it sustains beyond the GreenLight engagement. And we've seen that play over in 13 different urban settings, soon to be 14 in January. We'll be launching our 14th site in Miami. And we started in Boston 20 years ago. And we've got 55 organizations that we've partnered with to help them support local work across the country. And time again, it works, and it works in a way that meets the unmet needs. And so it's a beautiful model that I'm proud to be a part of.
Yeah, and I would just add that, every day in my work, I get to go out into our community, talk to community members, my residents, neighbors, community leaders, to really ask what your wildest dreams are for our community and what we can do together to bring those to reality. And so our work really starts with a community-led process that helps us identify where we can have the most impact. Once we've identified that, as Ali said, we look for transformative or initiatives, programs, organizations that don't exist already in our local ecosystem, but that could be great partners and really respond to those dreams that we've identified with our community residents and partners. We then provide some seed funding to help get those programs launched and off the ground. But our work really goes beyond, that check. I spend a lot of time, walking alongside those programs and initiatives that I've identified and partnered with to ensure that their success goes beyond those GreenLight dollars and is sustainable and responding to the needs of our community. Because at the end of the day, as a local leader, I really see myself as someone who is beholden to and responsive to the community members that that I live, work, and play with. And so I want to ensure that the work that I'm doing and leading in partnership with our community is truly responsive and having the impact that we articulated we needed at the start of our process.
You mentioned a community's most pressing needs. And I don't know if you all hear that a lot, but I hear pressing needs. I hear so everyone can thrive. I hear scalable. I hear sustainable. And so by way of throwing my hardball, like what makes GreenLight unique?
One of the things that drew me to GreenLight is this term, inclusive prosperity. This idea that we can affect change in a way that benefits everybody. And I think what's baked into that assumption is that is that you have to acknowledge that it's not a level playing field, that like all tides don't rise ships if all boats don't work. And so that like economic growth, economic stimulation has to account for people who are at a disadvantage. And so equity is leaning in and understanding that and being very targeted in your investments in ways that address the folks who need the most support. And I think GreenLight does that. I think obviously like letting a local process drive our investments means the community gets to choose what's important to them, what's needed, and how do we leverage the existing assets in the community. And I think that's very unique to GreenLight, but also unique in the philanthropic sector. But I think in that process, two things are true. One is equity is baked into it, especially if like community is a cross-section of all folks in the community and not just folks with power and influence. And that's something that we care about deeply in our community advisory councils, that we have a cross-section of voices, particularly those with lived experiences showing up and participating in this process. And so it's a power sharing thing that I think is important to us. But I also think that what it does is ensure that we allow the community to be the experts of solving the problems and not GreenLight coming in and saying, this is what you do, this is how you do it. Now, we've got a network, we've got 20 years of experience, we've got 55 nonprofits that we've worked with that have done some amazing things across the country. But the community at the end of the day is the expert of what works in that community and what needs to work and what are the conditions for success. And to me, that is how we lean into equity. And that's what's unique about GreenLight.
So can you tell me a little bit about the evolution story? Like, how did GreenLight get started? Like, who envisioned it? Who's sort of the network behind the network?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in a lot of ways, it sort of gives me a chance to elevate something that's unique to both my journey into GreenLight and just my leadership journey, and that I'm following a founder. So GreenLight there's a co-founding of our board chair, John Simon, co-founded GreenLight with Margaret Hall some 20 years ago out of Boston. And I think some of it, and the founder story is codified and documented at this point. But as I understand it, John had a vision for applying parts of his ideas and experiences of the business sector where they might have been needed most. And I think he'd experienced some trial and error through that process. And one of the things that he learned is that like community has to be rooted in a community. You can't go into a community and say, this is what you need, this is how you do it. Like the community has to pull you in, the community have to identify the need, and you need to be responding to that. And I think he found a partner in Margaret who not only affirmed that reality, but like brought her experience in the work to the GreenLight, developing a GreenLight model. And so they started in Boston, and GreenLight was in Boston as its single site for I think the first 8 years of our operations. And then around 2012, GreenLight expanded to new cities, San Francisco Bay and Philadelphia being the first and second new cities out of Boston. And we've grown significantly since then to the point that now we're in 13 cities, soon to be 14th. And every city creates an opportunity to learn something different about the model, learn something different about how do we lean into that community-driven process, because every community is different. So,
thank you for that. And I want to just shout out Adair Mosley, who sits on the national board. Simone, here is GreenLight. They make a decision that Minneapolis has all of the things that you described, right? A community that has unmet needs, a community that has leadership capacity, and that there's an ecosystem of support. I know you came in sort of towards the beginning, but after many of those conversations had begun. Can you share a little bit about maybe how the city responded then and how they're responding now?
Yes, I can. So just setting a little bit of context, this was GreenLight Fund Twin Cities was announced and launched officially January of 2020. March of 2020, everything shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic. May 2020, we all experienced the murder of George Floyd and the civil unrest that followed. I was hired in August 2020 and started in this role. And so just want to lay that groundwork in that setting because I think it matters deeply to where we were and where we are now. I'll also add that I think Minnesota is a place and space where we as Minnesotans typically lean into our what did we create here? What do we like? What do we support? And are often skeptical, frankly, of things that, new things that are, coming from other spaces, places, cities, et cetera. And so I want to name that as well as the context that I described around just what was happening in our community, which I think converged into, frankly, a really challenging time for a leader to come in and really talk about a new organization that not only are we new to the community, but we're bringing in new things to the community. What does that look like in the context of the great work that is already existing and going on across the Twin Cities? And so I had to really step back and think about how to approach this work in a way that honors what our community was thinking, feeling at the time and experiencing, but also how do we move forward with innovation and new solutions that can partner with the existing work that's going on and really fill a gap or an unmet need. I often talk about my work as we want to identify that gap in services or resources and find ways to respond to it in unique ways that will partner with existing work in the community. And so my conversations with many of you who are in the audience today during that time really helped inform and shape the direction that led me on the path that I took to get to the space where we were ready to make our first selection of an innovative program. But I just want to name that work was intentional, and it was really about how do we come together as partners. And that's not to say there were skeptics. I vividly recall a conversation with a longtime community leader who said to me, "I fundamentally disagree with what you're doing." And I said, we went round and round around, my vision for the community and what I was trying to do and the partnerships and collaborations that were possible. But, at the end of the day, we ended that call with, we'll have to agree to disagree. That was maybe fall of 2020. This past year in February, I held an event to announce our second investment, which is an organization focused on the disparities around that Black women and birthing people face in maternal health. And that community leader came to that event, and after the program, he came up to me and said, "I remember that conversation. I think about it often, and I also need to tell you, you proved me wrong. I get what you're doing. I see the work you did, and I'm really proud of you." So, part of it is just wait and see. A lot of those conversations I had in 2020 were great. Let's wait and see what we can do together. So,
if I could jump in, I love that story, Simone, and I think that is, to me, an example of what is our job is to prove ourselves. The onus is on us to prove ourselves. The model is radical. It is innovative. In a lot of ways, it might be counterintuitive to what it means to be locally driven, but it works. And, with time and energy and effective local leadership, we see it work. And, but it's not lost on us that we have to prove ourselves. Every GreenLight site is accountable to the community that we partner with. And sometimes that means agreeing to disagree, but continuing to work and invest in a relationship until we agree. And so, yeah.
When Simone started, I was like, was that me? Did I say? But then she ended with he, and I wasn't at that event, so it wasn't me. But I will say,
I do recall my first conversation with you when I stepped into the role, and you weren't as, I could tell there was some skepticism, but yeah.
I'm like, ooh, I just thought it was me, but I was skeptical, and as someone from this community, there are always people coming in and wanting to scale and do something, and they don't understand the local context. And then I got quite confused when they hired you, because I'm like, oh, I'm skeptical, but her, right? Like, and so I just bring that up because I think it's really important in terms of the commitment to make it through. And it wasn't an easy journey, right? It wasn't an easy time. I think that's what you were trying to say, to come into a condition where the community didn't just have issues, those issues had been spotlighted across the globe. And our energy was intense. It was angry. It was fed up. It was expressing all the disappointment for all the failed efforts beforehand. And so as you have had to navigate that, Simone, what have you learned?
I've learned a lot. I've learned that there is a community of support around me and people that I can call and lean on and ask questions and get thoughts and opinions and advice from. I've learned that in order to really get to bold, transformational change, we have to do a better job of building a table of people that, might not always agree with each other, but are at the table because they care about the issue or the thing or the end result, and are committed to the work. And I also learned that, building and this sort of ties back to like my previous work and experiences, but, I sat in spaces prior to my GreenLight role where I was, often the only person in the room making decisions, major federal policy decisions, and I was the only person who looked like me. And these policy decisions were going to impact hundreds of thousands of Black and brown people across the country. And I think I've learned, I've always knew, but now have really seen in action what you can do when you build a table that is full of people from a lot of different walks of life, again, that may not always agree on everything, but are committed to a vision or an end result, and are willing to do the hard work to get there.
Were you going to add? I seen you agreeing.
No, I mean, I agree with everything Simone said, and I think we're incredibly fortunate to have her leadership and her commitment to Minnesota or the Twin Cities to sort of forge the path for GreenLight's presence here. But what I was going to offer is that so my first entry into the GreenLight work was here in Minneapolis. We had our all-staff retreat in May of 2024. And I got to meet the full staff. It was a week before my official start, so I hadn't even, it was week 0, if you will. And I was struck by how intentional we were about honoring and uplifting the importance of the place and our contributions to the place, but also the assets that existed there in ways that, I came into the job with a sense of healthy skepticism about what it means to be community-driven, and quickly saw it in real time. Now, not to say we get it right every time or it's perfect. I think it's really about what Simone said, which is sort of like continuing to do the work to align to the common goals, even if we don't agree with some of the technical or strategic things. And I think Simone's story really, really exemplifies that. And I think that that's what GreenLight is going to be about, both locally and nationally. How do we continue to align around common goals, around urban poverty, around uplifting and creating opportunity for everyone?
So you said that there are times that you maybe didn't get it right. Do you have an indication when you are in a place, and I know you're new, and this may not be a fair question, but when it has missed the mark on embedding community? Like, what are the signs when it's not driven by community voice?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can't give specific examples because they're not my experiences to sort of lean into. There are the stories of lore, but they're not my experiences. But what I can tell you that seems to be very clear around lessons learned in our 20 year of experiences is local leadership. Like when local leadership says this won't take, this won't, the conditions aren't right for these reasons, creating a space for local leadership to really lean into their local expertise, their understanding of the local context. That, to me, is, I think, the greatest both indicator and conduit for us getting it right.
I was just going to add to that point, when I am locally, when my team and I are thinking about, okay, what can we do? Where can we have an impact? And going through our process, I have this picture in my mind of this slide that we often show our advisory council of these intersection of opportunity for impact and community need, and that intersection. And so, I think we know we've gotten it right when those things line up, and when they don't, I think that's when you sort of have the problems that you're alluding to.
Yeah, and we know, on the ground, communities we tried to tell them. They didn't listen, but they're coming back to hear us now. And so I think that does happen, and that could be seen in all kinds of ways, but the idea that both sides are sort of sticking with it as ideas evolve, I think is incredibly important.
And I'd add, that's why, and I think that's a really important point, because every step of our process, my team and I are going back to both grassroots and grass tops, as I like to say, in our community. So community leaders, but also, talking to our neighbors and residents and people with who are more proximate to some of the issues that we're trying to tackle, to say, hey, we found this amazing program. We think it might be a good fit. But what do you think? Is this something you would use? Is this a service you would consider? Do you have someone in your family who would need this program? And so really wanting to understand, or I should say maybe really wanting to make clear that this is being pulled in by community and not being pushed in by us.
Just visited another GreenLight site earlier this week, and the community advisory group selected an organization that, quite frankly, I think is being pulled in the community. But this is the second time this group was a finalist for the process. The first time it wasn't ready, the conditions weren't right, and we knew it as a result of the process. But we also knew that there was an unmet need that this organization, under the right conditions, could meet it. And so I think, to me, that's an example of following the process, listening to the community, but also being persistent and sticking with aligning to achieve common goals, so that sometimes getting it right means getting it right at the right time.
And you also described scaling innovative ideas and new approaches. How do you all define that?
Yeah, so so GreenLight is committed to scale. We're now at, as I mentioned, 13 urban cities. We'll be in 14 in January. And we've got a pathway to get to 18 by 2028, and we've got some ideas for what 15 and 16 will look like. And so a lot of our work right now is sort of toiling the soil to sort of lay the seeds for the next sites. But we're also committed to growth, scale, and innovation in the cities that we're in. And so the cool thing about the model is that every sort of cycle of GreenLight presence in a city means, when we do it right, we bring in four new things over a 5-year period. And that gives us an opportunity to be incredibly strategic about how do we not only meet specific needs, but where's the intersection between how we're intervening and bringing innovative programs in to meet larger, complex city needs. And so at the end of it, looking at a 5-year period and say, we've got 4 things that sort of solve these 4 or contribute to the solutions for these 4 problems, and that they create synergies in these ways. GreenLight's now have a local network. And so how do we continue to build on that? And so that's one of the ways in which I think innovation will continue to thrive and inform and evolve our presence locally. But the other way is that with new sites, with the new cities, we're continuing to build the network. We're continuing to understand local context in many localities in service of solving American poverty, right? Solving this problem nationally. And how does GreenLight be part of that larger national solution through our work on the ground?
And so do you see part of the innovation story is how you weave together the strategy, sort of the uniqueness of the puzzle, if you will, so it's not something that you replicate in each place, but the innovation is how you're bringing the pieces together in connection to the community that you're embedding in? Is that where you think your sweet spot is for innovation?
I think it's a both and. I think we bring in proven solutions who've scaled elsewhere, who know what they're doing, and so it's a really safe bet that they're going, like if the community have said that this is what we need, we're pulling them in, it's a safe bet that they're going to be successful. And we'll have a sense of what that looks like, but we'll also evolve and adapt to what it looks like in a local context over the 4-year period of our investment. But I'm also saying that feeds into the local ecosystem of other things that's gone on, both things that GreenLight has brought into the community and just other things that are happening locally. And all of that, in my opinion, feeds into a larger national strategy about how do we create more opportunities for Black and brown folks and other folks who are marginalized across the country? How do we address poverty in urban settings, given the complexities of the local context? And quite frankly, how does the country address that more broadly beyond GreenLight and GreenLight's investment? And I think all of those are opportunities for scale, for impact and innovation. And I think when you get all of that done right, you're really leaning into equity.
Well, one of those innovations that came is Earth. And so can you share, Simone, a little bit on how you identified that and why you felt like it was a good fit for the Twin Cities GreenLight?
Yes. So for the last couple of years, my team and I, in our listening and learning and community conversations, one of the topics that continued to come up were the disparities that Black women and birthing people experience in their maternal health journey. That it rose to the top of our list over multiple years. There is a strong body of research and data that also supports that there is, so it's a well-documented problem, across, not just in the Twin Cities, but across the country, frankly, that Black women are dying at a rate 3 times more than their white counterparts. And so we, taking this data, this information, also noting, again, thinking about that opportunity for impact and the momentum, recognizing that we have a state commissioner of health who identifies as a Black woman committed to helping to solve the maternal health crisis in our community, and a maternal mortality review board led by the state that is, saying coming out with policy, and systems recommendations around how to change these outcomes. So all of these things were a convergence into what can GreenLight do, to respond? And so we started looking for innovative, impactful organizations that were addressing this concern in other parts of the country, and found the organization Earth. Earth is, I just want to say, is IRTH. They dropped the B for bias in birthing. And they are a program that is both deeply community-focused and community-centered in their work, and combine that with addressing some systems change work as well. And so Earth is, you can think of them as a Yelp-like review system, an app, if you will, where Black and brown birthing people can leave reviews, leave their birthing experiences through using technology, and really talk about what their experience looks like, where they had that experience. Doulas are invited to share what they've experienced. Doulas are often the folks in the room who are listening and seeing everything, and it's not often always realized. And so doulas are invited to share what they've experienced and seen through their work. So anyone, father figures, other guardians are invited to share as well. And the Earth team then starts to really look at this data and think about, the pattern, identify the patterns, and then also goes to those hospital systems, to those clinics to say, here's what your patients have experienced or are experiencing, and how can we work with you all to address these concerns? We know that you had a large number of birthing people, Black birthing people, who've said my pain was ignored, or I experienced treatment that that was atypical or that I didn't deserve. And how do let's hold these systems accountable, but also work with them to put a plan in place to create change and to shift the outcomes for Black women and birthing people. And also the key is, we know that when we get it right for Black women, we get it right for everyone. And so I think it's a really powerful organization and tool to help respond to the disparities in our community.
One of the things that I'm thinking about is the expansion that you mentioned, and the expansion of GreenLight that's coming into other cities, and the opportunity to learn across that network. How is that organized and situated, and how does it inform both what's happening nationally and locally?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really lucky that I have a network of executive directors from across the 14 cities that GreenLight is working in, where we talk on a regular basis and share practices, share knowledge. Our executive director in Miami, for example, was like, tell me more about Earth. I really love the work they're doing. I see that there could be some potential in our community for their work. And so, I'm able to share a little bit about, our partnership here and what that looks like. I also get to learn, some of the organizations that we're considering, as responding to some of their, pressing needs and urgent needs in our community, are doing work in other GreenLight sites. And I get to say, tell me, what that experience has been. How do they work? What does that look like? What can I learn from you? And so, and I think there's also just really interesting differences and similarities around what's going on in our communities across the GreenLight network, which is not surprising, I suppose, but I think really allows for some dynamic conversation and sharing of best practices, but also saying, hearing from colleagues, ooh, I wouldn't go that direction. Have you considered these 5 things? So.
One of the advantages of being national, or certainly when things come, you're like, okay, it's coming with capacity, it's coming with resources, it's coming with a number of things. Can you talk about the funding model? What does that look like in these expansion sites? And just share that.
So we have, as you've heard, we've got 14 sites, which means we've got 14 local leaders and teams focusing on pulling together a community of leaders to identify needs in that community. That translates to, I think, about 450 community advisory members across the network. So we've got about 450 local leaders that are coming together thinking about how to solve problems in that community. And they all bring expertise and perspective that, quite frankly, is both useful to that community, but useful to the larger problems we're trying to solve across the country. And then we've got 55 and counting organizations that we've helped grow and be pulled into different communities over the course of the 20 years, and that's growing. And all of those organizations are thriving, doing well, and continuing to evolve and adapt to the local need, the national landscape of nonprofit service. So there's a lot of knowledge, expertise, experience, strategy baked into all of these folks trying to solve urban poverty from so many different ways. And there's an opportunity for us to pull together in some strategic ways that network and leverage it to drive national conversations. On the funding side, we do have a unique model that I'm still fascinated by and learning about. So we raised the initial, it's based off of some of the, so it's based off of, I think, the venture capitalist model, in that we raise funds for a fund. We give ourselves, when we raise the capital, 5 years to prove that we can make a difference. And then we go back and raise the money again. So I think there's 2 things that goes on. One is it gives our local leaders the flexibility to focus on identifying what the needs are and how to bring in needs and make sure they stick when we pull them in, so that they don't have to worry about raising the funds year over year. Now, there's certainly some things about that we're learning that we'll be testing, but for the most part, that's the model. The local leaders are really focusing on getting it right and learning and responding to the community needs over those 5 years before we go out and raise again. All local dollars go to local work. The national office is a separate funding mechanism for raising the funds to support the national office, but we are committed to local dollars staying local. And we know that, it's on us to get it right and to do it well in order to continue to sustain our presence. And so,
just to add to that, wanted to also just share, and be clear that the programs that I'm selecting and bringing in partnership with our community, we are providing seed funding for it, but oftentimes that's not enough for that program to scale and be sustainable. And so we are also sort of working together in the community to identify financial resources and support for those programs and organizations, both public and private dollars. And so I think that's that is part of the role and the work as well, and really is a deep, an important piece of ensuring success of the programs that we're bringing in. But I just also want to just double click on the point Ali made around, our funding model as an organization, and it really does set up an executive director to be able to come in, like you said, and focus on the work. I didn't have to come in and think about, okay, I got to start fundraising and figure out where the next dollars are coming from. I just got to be in community and do the work in a way that I think a lot of, it was a privilege when I think about a lot of the nonprofit space.
Yeah, but the money's important. So my question, Ali, is you're relatively new, you're months into this, so I appreciate you again having this conversation. And in good old Twin Cities fashion, we just meeting you now, so we need to know where you've been.
Yeah, right on.
Who are you? We've heard it from a technical sort of GreenLight point of view, but can you share a little bit more about, number one, what has been the driver for you making a time investment, a career investment in impacting communities? What is the motivation behind that?
No, I appreciate the question, Chanda, and I love I love to tell my story when it makes sense. So I guess I'll just start with, I'm a young, in my heart, I will always be a young Black boy from Brooklyn, New York, born in Harlem, raised in Brooklyn. In all spaces that I work, where I do the work, there's a picture of the Brooklyn Bridge. As a reminder of where I've come from and how I got here. And so, being a kid who grew up poor in New York City, in Brooklyn, and in Harlem, during a time when, the narrative being told about young Black boys were that we were super predators, that we were not worthy of investment, and that we should be locked up in order to keep other folks safe. I found myself trying to counter that narrative, both in my everyday experience, but also in my pursuit of impact in the world. And so I brought that to just the desire to be in a nonprofit space, to work on programs and work on systems disruption in service of young people who look like me, young people who don't look like me, but a broader sort of orientation around a commitment to justice has been, my life's journey. Because I grew up poor in an urban city, I also relied on the programs, the nonprofits and systems that others rely on, that GreenLight either partners with or invests in to drive immediate impact. And so I do believe in the innovation of the nonprofit sector, the opportunity for innovation and problem solving. I do believe in the community collective efficacy, community playing a role in identifying what the needs are and how we solve those needs. And so there's a lot of a values alignment based on my lived experience on a GreenLight model. Professionally, I've worked in the justice space. I've worked in New York City, in the Bay Area. I've worked with young people. I've worked in the education space. And so a deep investment in potential and seeing potential turn into results has always been my orientation around service. And so it starts with young people, but I think that holds true for anybody. Like if you see potential and you invest and create the conditions for that potential to turn to results, then good things happen. And I think that that's what GreenLight is about. And so there's a lot of alignment and the opportunity there for me. And then I think the last thing I'll say is I'm excited about where we're going because I really do believe that every city, every community is unique, and yet the stories are similar enough that if you listen to them, you can hear the threads and you can learn something that applies to another city, another setting in solving these problems. And I've lived that. Having lived in a couple of cities on the coast now, I've seen it, having visited in cities in the middle of the country, in the South, and seeing the commonality between my experience and young people in these different parts of the world, the country. And I'm excited about GreenLight leaning into that and leveraging its size and scale to solve some of these larger problems.
You just touched a little bit on perhaps your vision for what it looks like in your tenure here. Is that a big piece of it, is thinking what you just articulated in terms of young people and scaling and maybe codifying, documenting those stories differently? Is that part of what you see as your vision and an opportunity of leadership?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think about the problems we're trying to solve. One of the things that's clear to me is that it has to be a multi-pronged approach. And I think GreenLight's commitment to investing in partnering and proving models and bringing proving models to places where the need is met, needs need to be met. That's going to be our bread and butter, organizations that can serve and support at scale, but in a sustainable way. And I think the innovation, the excitement is in how do we shift power, local power, how do we build agency, how do we create opportunities, and how do we tell the stories about all of that? That's also going to be part of the GreenLight magic and what makes us a powerful, impactful organization.
I'm thinking that part of the magic might also be on telling the stories of what didn't work. That's not always the most comfortable space to be in because we are all trying to attract money, but I don't think we talk about attempts that failed. How does that land?
It lands incredibly well with me. It's so funny because I recently met with our national team and attempted, perhaps not as effective as I liked, to sort of explain, in my opinion, the relationship between failure and excellence and how they're not two opposite sides of a spectrum, but oftentimes failure is on a road to excellence. That you lean into failure as learning opportunities, as smart risk-taking, in order to get to a place where you go further faster, you go further deeper. And so not being afraid to fail in service of excellence, but not languishing in the space of failure, because then that starts to corrode the standards of the things that you're trying to achieve. Like you can't linger in it, you've got to learn from it. And I fully believe that. And the other thing I'll say is that it's interestingly enough, we discovered when we talked earlier that we've got a mutual friend. He runs an organization, Vera Institute of Justice, and where I cut my teeth in some of this justice work. And I worked for a failing nonprofit. a failure demonstration project that ironically, I won't say its name, but there's some irony in its name. And the learnings I had early in my career of Vera, of the team saying, okay, this didn't achieve the results that we wanted, but what are the 4 or 5 things we learned that we could apply to whatever's next? And I really took that to heart, and that's how I approach innovation and my courageousness around innovation. So.
Yeah, shout out to Nick Turner.
Yeah.
I was just going to add to, as I was listening to Ali, I think we talk a lot at GreenLight Fund about innovation. And for me, innovation means risk. And risk sometimes means failure. And I think being comfortable with taking a risk, because I also believe that if you don't take a risk, we're not going to ever create any transformational change. So if you're not taking a risk, we're not going to learn and really get ourselves on that path to change. And so, failure, yes, you're right, no one likes to talk about it, but we should talk about those stories and think about what could be different, what is possible, how do you re-innovate or continue to innovate until we, get the change that we're looking for.
My last question is for you, Simone, and Ali, I sort of asked about your journey to this, and we are in the Twin Cities. We know Simone a little bit, but I still think it would be really helpful to hear a little bit about your journey and motivation for this work and where you've been and how you got here.
Yes. I think I would say I'm a third generation Minnesotan. I come from a long line of, I think, community leaders and family members who have cared deeply about our community, and in particular the Black community. My father is sitting back there. He's someone who has modeled for me what it means to show up in our community and lead with heart and love and compassion, and to also acknowledge that it's okay to get to be tired or feel frustrated, but you keep going because we care. And so I just want to acknowledge that I have that amazing foundation and legacy that I get to build on every day. I left Minnesota for quite a while. I went to school in Washington, D.C., and really built my career there, and had the opportunity to lead some amazing work on Capitol Hill in the United States Senate, working on education policy for Senator Klobuchar, as well as a senator from North Carolina, and then spent 4 years working for President Obama and the U.S. Secretary of Education, also on education policy. And in that work, and I alluded to this earlier in the conversation, I spent a lot of time in spaces and in rooms where, again, I was often the only person who looked like me. I was, writing legislation, coming up with policy ideas, all with a focus, a deep focus and commitment to identifying how, in this case, to create a better education system for Black and brown kids and kids who are from low-income families and communities. And it was an amazing time to do that work, particularly in the Obama administration for me. But I also learned that, I learned a lot of things. It was hard work. But I learned that there was just a significant piece missing. And the Obama administration ended, and my husband and I decided it might be time to move and head back, home for me, not for him, and raise our son here in the Twin Cities. And making that decision, and also committing to raising my son here, I knew that I wanted to do some work that would change the dynamics that I experienced, in Washington, D.C., and really focus on my local community, the community that raised me, and the community where I'm now raising my son. And so the work that I get to do at GreenLight Fund, every day, it's not lost on me that we are bringing in really amazing programs and organizations that, if not for me and my team, would likely not be here. And even when the days get hard or things feel challenging, remembering that we are truly making a difference and seeing that difference every day, is I feel really grateful that I get to do this work, and I get to fulfill some of the legacy that I talked about, but also make this a better place for my son and all the other little ones that look like him.
Mm-hmm. I love the legacy piece, and her dad, John Hardeman, has the John Hardeman Girls and Boys Club situated inside of V3 Sports. It is something when you see people in community that have made the investments that get honored in that way. I have traveled, and one of the things that has been hardest about my journey is the lack of names of people of color on buildings, on street signs, on things, and that allow me to see the reflection of who led and made it possible, but for inspiration on what's possible in terms of my own evolution. And so I'm deeply grateful for your family's legacy hitting my family in that way. And so, John, thank you for all that you have done and continue to do for this community and the inspiration you have provided. Thank you so much, LEAD Knight, for being here, the CEO of GreenLight Fund, and to you, Simone Hardeman-Jones, the Executive Director of Twin Cities GreenLight Fund.
When GreenLight came, there was a lot of skepticism about how it would sort of move into the space, particularly because the founders weren't from here, although there's a lot of intention, as you've already stated, to hiring local leadership. But can you just share a little bit more about your intentionality and how you support local organizations and leaders as you advance the mission of the GreenLight Fund?
Yes, absolutely. So it was really important to me, particularly as our work started in 2020, shortly after the murder of George Floyd, to really listen to the call that I was hearing from our community to reinvest in our community. And so as an organization that is looking at innovative models that don't exist in our local ecosystem, I really was intentional about thinking about how I could support a existing local organization, but also bring in a partnership with something new and innovative that didn't already exist, that was responding to that community need that we'd identified. And so what that looked like for our first investment was finding this organization, Let Everyone Advance with Dignity, which is a public health approach to community safety, but rooting that program, sort of partnering that program within a local community-based organization that has the respect of community, the trust of community, and was an alignment around the mission and goals. And after identifying a set of criteria for the type of organization we'd be looking for with this partnership, we identified that Pillsbury United Communities would be an amazing fit for the LEAD program. So now today, the LEAD program, LEAD Minneapolis, is housed at Pillsbury United. They are embedded in that organization's work and aligned with their missions and strategic goals, and have this longstanding community-based organization now as a partner in the work moving forward.
That sounds fantastic. And I can appreciate that approach. So once you sort of position it within the organization, what does your continuing role look like with either both Pillsbury United Communities or with the organization you brought in? Like, you know, there's like three pieces that you're navigating. Yeah. How does it look?
Yeah, so it's a significant amount of work on my end, but worthwhile work, I would say, because I am supporting this new program and working with that national organization to ensure that the model that we know works well is working with fidelity in our community and with our community partners. But I'm also working directly with the leadership at Pillsbury United to ensure that there's a seamless partnership going as well, both between GreenLight Fund Twin Cities and Pillsbury, but also the LEAD program. And so that looks like a number of things from regular check-ins with all parties, all teams to ensure alignment, both individually as well as combined efforts. It also looks like, GreenLight signs, we create what we call engagement agreements with our partners. And so we have an MOU or an engagement agreement with Pillsbury and the national LEAD program to execute this work in the Twin Cities and in the city of Minneapolis in particular, so that we're all aligned to the same process and goals and outcomes that, again, were identified by our community members.
It seems like one of the advantages to the local organization is, one, to be introduced to national sort of exemplars that seems like they would possibly inform perhaps their work, certainly deepen their connection and understanding of what's happening in a broader perspective than what sometimes you can see when your head's down working in a neighborhood or working in an organization.
Yes, I certainly see that with LEAD and the ability that the LEAD national program has to say, here's what we've seen work or not work in Seattle or in Denver or Cincinnati. And here's some best practices you can think about, but also we recognize that your community is unique. It's not a one size fits all program or situation, but here's a toolkit that you can use to do this work in meaningful ways. Here's what we know, what we've seen, and here's how you might be able to adapt it based on your local context.
One of the things that I think I'm gathering from just learning more about GreenLight Fund is that really it is bringing national resources into this market or into the markets that they're in that didn't previously exist.
Sure.
So the way that I'm hearing it is that it's helping to build capacity to make impact by adding proven models into the places and organizations that you're partnering with. And then I think that you had said this, but my assumption then is that you're somewhat of a capacity builder around the resources to execute on that. So my assumption is that those resources go into those organizations that you're partnering with.
Yes, that's right. So if you think about, LEAD is a national model. We are now implementing it in the city of Minneapolis, and the LEAD program is housed at Pillsbury United Communities, which means that GreenLight Fund's dollars are going to Pillsbury United to support the work of LEAD in the city of Minneapolis. LEAD is a national technical assistance model, so they are providing all of the expertise, the best practices, and showing us what they've seen work well in other communities and the data and the evidence to support that. But the funding that is used to support the work, both from GreenLight Fund and also our other funding partners, so the city of Minneapolis, for example, goes to Pillsbury United to support the work. I'll also add that, because I think it's a really important piece, is that when we do these partnerships, we're hiring locally. So we hired a local leader from the community to be the project manager for LEAD. That person is now an employee at Pillsbury United Communities. The case managers are also employees at Pillsbury as well. And they all, are from the community and have lived experience, particularly living in and experiencing the community, the Lake Street corridor community where LEAD is focused.
What I can really appreciate about this is that it's not necessarily coming in and then with new leadership and new things, potentially it can sort of move, but it's building in sort of impactful strategies into the DNA of the ecosystem so that it can sort of live beyond a particular moment, so that it can be embedded with the voice of the organization with local experts. And so in some ways, it's a different type of sustainability plan and approach to building organizations and making an impact.
Yes, that's right. We always have an eye towards sustainability long term. So how are we, and that's why part of the intentionality around an organization like Pillsbury that has such a strong and long history in our community. We know that they will be there and continuing the work that they do for years to come. And also, I think there is a piece that this partnership provides around just infrastructure for a program, things that like benefits and payroll and development team and finance and operations that come along with a partnership like this one that I think is really beneficial for a program like LEAD to be able to have access to in that partnership as well.
I can imagine that as people are listening to this conversation, both here in the Twin Cities and then for our national leaders thinking, man, I would sure love to hear more. Like, there's some ideas I have, or they may or may not have been familiar with the GreenLight Fund. If people wanted to learn more, where should they go to learn more about the work that you are doing and others are doing across the country?
Yes, please join us at greenlightfund.org. If you want to know more about Twin Cities, that's greenlightfund.org/Twin Cities. But you can also go to our website and learn about the work going on in Greenlight sites across the country, from Atlanta to Newark, New Jersey, to the Bay Area, Kansas City, and more. So join us on that website. You can learn about not only the work that we're doing and the specific organizations that we are supporting, but what we're doing nationally as well.